Hi AP students, this is Chapter 8, Aquatic Biodiversity. So what is the general nature of aquatic ecosystems? Well, first of all, we need to look at the distribution of water on Earth. Most of the water on Earth, 71%, is salt water. Fresh water is about 2.2%. You can see if we look at a graph of the water on Earth, about 97% of the water on Earth is salt water. Fresh water comprises 3% of the water on Earth. If we take that fresh water and enlarge that portion, most of the fresh water on Earth is held in the ice caps and glaciers. We have about 30% of that underground, and then about 0.3% is surface water in lakes, rivers, streams, and we have other holding spaces at 0.9%. So most of the fresh water on Earth that life relies on is actually frozen. Then we take that 0.3% of surface water, which is easily accessible by humans, and 87% of that is in lakes, 11% in swamps, and about 2% in rivers. All of the ocean connects, and we call that the global ocean, a continuous body of water. It's divided into four main areas: the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean, with the Pacific being the largest. Aquatic life zones, that's what we call aquatic biomes, aquatic life zones. There are two main types of aquatic life zones, freshwater and saltwater. The difference is that saltwater has salt in it. It has a higher salinity. The four main factors, besides being fresh or salt water, the four main factors that determine where in the water you find life are nutrients. That means food, temperature, warm or cold, oxygen, all living things need oxygen, and sunlight. Most aquatic species live in the top layer, some in the middle, and then fewer in the bottom layers where it's dark and cold. There are categories of aquatic organisms. Nekton are free swimmers, free-swimming fish. Benthos are bottom dwellers like catfish and decomposers. The category of decomposers. Plankton, three types of plankton: phytoplankton, which is plant plankton, zooplankton, animal plankton, and ultraplankton, which is photosynthetic bacteria. In this video, we're going to learn about marine ecosystems, or marine life zones. So, why are oceans important? Why should we study them? They give us many ecological and economic services. Ecological services include climate moderation. Water absorbs heat and slowly releases it, so it helps moderate the temperatures on Earth. The oceans absorb carbon dioxide, and you know that's a problem with increased carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. Actually, the absorption of carbon dioxide by the oceans could change ocean chemistry, and we'll talk about that later on. They're involved in the nutrient cycling, the cycles of life, recycling all those carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur atoms needed to build living things. They serve as waste treatment areas. They reduce storm impact on land. They're habitats and nursery areas for wildlife. They're genetic resources and biodiversity resources, and they also provide scientific information. The economic services that oceans provide include they provide food for us, animal and pet food. They're a source of pharmaceuticals, drugs for the future, just like the tropical rainforests. They provide harbors and transportation routes, coastal habitats for humans. Everybody loves to live near the ocean, right? Recreation, employment, oil, natural gas, minerals, and building material. All right, marine life zones. We have the coastal zone and the open sea. The coastal zone is shallow. Sunlight reaches the bottom. You have a great diversity of life, plants growing on the continental shelf, When you reach the open sea, there is a major drop-off of the continental shelf, and it gets deep right away. So two major life zones, the coastal zone and the open sea. All right, now types of marine ecosystems. The first one is an estuary. An estuary is where the river runs into the ocean. All rivers eventually dump into the ocean. It's a very productive ecosystem because there's the mixing of fresh and salt water, which results in what's called brackish water, not completely salt water, not completely fresh water. This area is receiving nutrients from both the ocean and from the runoff from the rivers, so there are a lot of nutrients to make it very productive. And since it has a diversity of plant life, very productive, you also find a lot of different types of animal life in estuaries. Next type of marine ecosystem is a wetland. A wetland is an area that's covered in water for at least part of the year. There are two main types of wetland, marshes and swamps. Marshes are dominated by grasses and reeds. You can see a picture of a marsh over here, whereas swamps are dominated by woody plants, by trees, like cypress trees or mangrove trees. But in both of these cases, there are both fresh and saltwater marshes and swamps, but we're focusing on saltwater marine ecosystems in this video. Estuaries usually have wetlands associated with them, just around them as the river dumps into the ocean. I mentioned mangrove forests. There are marshes and swamps. But in tropical and subtropical areas, even in Florida, you find mangrove trees, and you can easily identify mangrove trees because they're on stilts out of the water. They have their roots sticking out of the water so that they can exchange gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide through the roots instead of being drowned in the water. And these trees are adapted to live in salt water. Coastal areas, like estuaries, but coastal marine life zones include areas called seagrass beds. Seagrass beds are coastal areas that have lots of plants growing on the floor of the ocean. And of course, where there's lots of plants, you'll find lots of animals. These seagrass beds can support up to 60 different types of plant species. Not only does it support life, that primary productivity, not only does it support the food chains in the coastal areas, but it also helps stabilize the shorelines. The plant roots help keep soils in place. But it's tough to live on the coast. The salinity is constantly changing, the temperature is constantly changing, the depth of the water with rains is constantly changing. So these organisms that live in coastal areas have to be pretty tough to survive all those changes all the time. All right. The ecological and economic benefits of wetlands. Wetlands are extremely important ecosystems, and we really didn't discover that until recently. Quite often, wetland areas, both fresh water and salt water, were filled in, thinking that they were just muddy, mucky areas. They were filled in for development. Southern Florida, a lot of the Everglades has been filled in. But they are very important ecologically because they clean the water. They act like sponges and they clean out any sediment or pollution. They absorb water to help prevent flooding. They're very important habitat for many different types of species, especially migratory species. They reduce storm damage along the coastline. When hurricanes or storms come in, the plants that grow on the coastline help reduce erosion. And we're allowing a lot of those wetland areas to be developed because, like I said, a lot of people like to live on the coast, and storm damage is going to occur to those homes that are built right on the coastline because the wetland areas and the mangrove trees have been removed. Also, loss of mangroves can lead to saltwater intrusion. We have a lot of water underground, fresh water that we rely on for irrigation and for our own consumption. If we remove the mangroves, the ocean water can actually move inland. It can penetrate inland and penetrate into the underground water supply, which is called an aquifer, and contaminate our freshwater supply so that we have to figure out how to remove the salt water in order to use it and to drink it. And we don't have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we don't have a lot of freshwater supplies. So we should protect the fresh water that we do have. So the loss of mangroves can lead to that saltwater intrusion, penetrating into aquifers and making our freshwater salty. Between 1980 and 2005, about 1/5 of mangrove forests were lost due to coastal development. Another type of marine ecosystem are beaches. There are rocky and sandy beaches. Again, organisms have to be pretty tough to live on beaches because of the tides moving in and out. They have to be able to hold on. Some of them have special features that allow them to cling to rocks or the sand. Some of them bury themselves in the sand to not be washed out into the ocean. The area where water rises and falls in between tides is called the intertidal zone. Rocky beaches like this often have tide pools. When the tide goes out, it leaves behind pools of water, and that supports a unique set of plankton and other small organisms. On the coastline, we also have barrier beaches where sand is deposited parallel to the shoreline. And these support many different types of shells and shorebirds. Another type of marine ecosystem are coral reefs. And coral reefs are like the tropical rainforest of the ocean. Very high levels of biodiversity, worth studying, may have the potential for producing pharmaceuticals to cure AIDS, to cure cancer. But we haven't had the opportunity to study all of these different types of living things that live in coral reefs. All right, the last type of marine ecosystem is the open ocean. There are 3 vertical zones in the open ocean, in the open sea. There's the euphotic zone. That's the depth to which light penetrates through the water. That's about 100 meters. Then we have the bathyal zone. And the bathyal zone is a little bit darker, not as much light penetrates this area, but we have a sharp decrease in temperature here. The water is fairly warm in the euphotic zone, but it starts to decrease just a little bit as it reaches the 100-meter mark. And then in the bathyal zone, we have a sharp decrease in temperature. It gets colder. And then we have the abyss, the dark sea bottom, where the temperature is very cold. This line, the temperature line, this is called the thermocline, showing how temperature decreases with depth. All right, finally, major human impacts on marine ecosystems and coral reefs. As with other habitats, we are having an impact on the health of marine ecosystems. In marine ecosystems, half of the coastal wetlands have been lost due to agriculture and urban development. Over 1/5 of mangrove forests have been lost to agriculture development and shrimp farms. The beaches are